Okay, the gaslighting yesterday from Tucker Carlson is just he is a man who sounds a little bit possessed. He's clearly angry. And what's particularly bad about Carlson is that he is just a coward. So instead of actually coming out and saying what he truly believes, he goes around and uses he goes right up to the line. And then when you accuse him of being an anti Semite or clearly hating Jews, he says, "Well, I never said that." Well, if you look at yesterday's speech during Charlie Kirk's memorial in a vacuum, then it might be somewhat easy to say, "Oh, you are finding something where there isn't anything, or that you're not being genuine. How could you say that he's definitely thinking this way?" All you have to do is you have to look at what he said the last year, and specifically since Charlie was murdered as well. This is a man who implied that Israel might have had something to do with it, or that Israel's views, or Charlie's views rather, on Israel were evolving, and therefore Israel would have essentially no choice but to do something. Completely outrageous, and it is a modern day blood libel. He called Benjamin Netanyahu a liar and accused him of trying to take advantage of Charlie's passing. I don't think that Netanyahu should have come out with a statement in the way that he did, but two things can be true at once. You can say that you have an issue with how he handled it, and also say that he's clearly not behind it. I mean, it's completely outrageous to imply that the state of Israel is behind the assassination of Charlie Kirk, certainly with absolutely no evidence. And that's exactly what Tucker Carlson does routinely. And then when you call him on it, he retreats to saying, "Well, I didn't say that. I was just asking questions." Whereas Nick Fuentes actually has the courage to say what he believes, like it or not. Tucker Carlson is a coward, a Jew hating coward. So I want to go back through some of the stuff that Carlson said in the last year or so. Um, when we talk about Jeffrey Epstein, this is a quote. He says, "And I think the real answer is Jeffrey Epstein was working on behalf of Intel Services, probably not American. And we have every right to ask, on whose behalf was he working?" So he's implying that Jeffrey Epstein, that he's Jewish, obviously a Jewish sounding name, was working for Israeli intelligence. And that's why he ran a pedophile sex ring where he was trafficking women and flying young women across the globe. And this is what the Jews do. This is what Israel does. Again, with no evidence, with no backing. And if you want to have a question, you want to ask a genuine question, look for answers. I'm not saying that's better, but at least you are trying to ground it in some semblance of reality instead of just speculating about someone who's now dead and going right up to the line and not having the courage to actually say what he's trying to imply. Another quote he said was, "It's extremely obvious to anyone who watches this guy, Epstein, had direct connections to a foreign government. Now, no one's allowed to say that foreign government is Israel because we've been somehow cowed into thinking that that's naughty." No, you idiot. You just don't have any evidence. And there's absolutely nothing to actually suggest that, other than the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was Jewish. So I can't think of another group of people that would be subjected to this kind of innuendo and wouldn't be, and there wouldn't be a major pushback against what they're saying and doing. So he's doing this. He takes every second he can, every moment he has to try to attack Israel, to attack Jewish people, but he doesn't do it outright. He only implies it. Another thing he said, there's a lot of Americans who served in the IDF and they should lose their citizenship. There are a lot of Americans who served in Ukraine and they should lose their citizenship. You can't fight for another country and remain an American, period, obviously. It's this kind of stuff of attacking Jews as being disloyal, of being involved in sex rings, of trying to manipulate the media that contributes to anti-Semitism. So when yesterday he says that his favorite story is essentially people sitting around Jerusalem eating hummus, thinking about how to kill Jesus or suggesting that they kill Jesus, and this reminds him of how Charlie Kirk was assassinated, based on the fact that he was speculating that it might have been Israel. I think it's totally fair for people to say this guy has a problem. Not to mention his maniacal laugh, but that's besides the point. But don't insult the intelligence of people that are paying attention and say that there's nothing there. Just come out and say it. At least Nick Fuentes comes out and says what he thinks, as opposed to Tucker, who's hiding behind this innuendo and mere suggestion that this is what's going on. It's also worth asking why his interactions with people that are on a pro-Israel side, he's particularly bombastic and particularly aggressive. And yet when it comes to, say, for example, Qatar or other foreign leaders, it's essentially softball interviews. So the Fox News Tucker Carlson that everyone used to love really only comes out when Tucker's talking about Jews and talking about Israel. He had just a few people to highlight. He's had George Stephanopoulos' anti-Semitic sister on. He's had Daryl Cooper, who actually called for airstrikes in Tel Aviv after the 12-day war with Iran started. He regularly puts people on like Dave Smith and talks about them as experts. He interviewed the president of Iran, with a very sympathetic interview. Very sympathetic interview. And the question is, are you allowed to just call this out for what it is? Why is it such a problem? Why can't Tucker just have the courage to come out and say what he thinks and what he's implying? It's because he knows that if he came out outright and said it, that people would be even more angry. So instead, he cowers, he hides about what's going on, and pretends that you're seeing things where there isn't any issues. We can go back to his discussion with Ted Cruz, where he tried to say because Ted Cruz didn't know specific population numbers, he doesn't know anything. Quote, you don't know anything about the country whose government you want to overthrow. Again, this line of questioning only comes up when it deals with stated enemies of the Jewish people, the state of Israel. There's let's not forget he also had John Mearsheimer on his show. He's called Benjamin Netanyahu's response after Charlie Kirk's assassination sickened. He said he was sickened by the ghoulish and really repulsive reaction of the Prime Minister of Israel. Do you see Tucker talking about any other leadership like this? So is it fair to ask? And this is not to say that every single thing that anyone ever says about Israel is anti-Semitic. Of course not. But it's the way in which Tucker deliberately elevates this kind of discussion and goes about it. I don't understand how people in the GOP and how the movement can stay silent. Now, there's an argument that you need the biggest tent possible to push the MAGA movement and to advance President Trump's agenda, and I understand that. But at what point is enough enough? Why is Tucker Carlson allowed to take the memorial service for Charlie Kirk and turn it into a show in which he accuses the Jews of killing Jesus, implies that they might have been behind the assassination of Charlie Kirk? How is that allowed? I I'm very concerned about what happens from here. I don't know exactly that there's enough people in the leadership of the conservative movement to actually oust Tucker Carlson, but it is a major problem that needs to be addressed because what he's doing is he's trying to break Christian support for Israel. He's trying to break conservative support for Israel. He's trying to imply that Jews are disloyal to America without evidence, clearly, demonstrably false ideas, and then hide behind a free speech or serious inquiry when everybody knows that's not actually what's going on. So to have that kind of actor elevated to the highest powers and speak with the president, the vice president, and be taken seriously is a major problem. As I've said, at least Nick Fuentes is open that he dislikes Jewish power or that he has an issue with the Jews, as he says. Tucker is intentionally elevating fringe voices in an effort to sow disagreement and create a disinformation campaign against Jews and against Israel. I don't have a strategy on how this is stopped, but it is a major threat. And it's important that people call out the nonsense and don't let Tucker get away with the things that he did yesterday. Of all of the stories he brings up, of all of the biblical teachings he could raise, he says his favorite one is it reminds him of Charlie's assassination and people trying to shut him up, but it happens to be in Jerusalem eating hummus. And then you call it out and people say, oh, well, this is, you're seeing anti-Semitism where there isn't any. Please. Look what he's been doing for the last year. This is not a decent man. This is not a religious man. This is someone who is a very hateful person, smearing Jewish communities, smearing the state of Israel, and creating a set of facts on the ground that are completely detached from reality. Let's take, for example, the war in Gaza. There are plenty of Israel and outside of Israel who disagree with a lot of what Israel has been doing. There are entire newspapers dedicated within Israel to opposing essentially everything that Benjamin Netanyahu and his government do. Nobody's sent to kill them. Nobody's sent to attack them. Nobody's trying to silence them, other than the military censor in Israel, which I have spoken out against. So the concept that people shut down or, God forbid, killed because of their opinion is absolutely ludicrous. There's no chance, zero chance, that that's what's motivating or motivated the assassin of Charlie Kirk. Yet Tucker Carlson is out there pushing these insane lies, then speaking at Charlie's memorial. And if you call it out, you're seen as now, looking for anti-Semitism under every rock. And I do oppose that. Again, if you look at how the ADL, the American Jewish Committee, and others responded to Charlie when he was alive, I think they were looking for anti-Semitism where there was not any. But what Tucker's doing is insanely dangerous, and it has to be called out. I can't imagine any other dog whistle that would be acceptable in a memorial service in front of the President of the United States and in front of the Vice President of the United States, in which the hummus in Jerusalem shtick was allowed to fly. I just can't see it. I think Tucker Carlson is an existential threat to the conservative movement. The fact that he, again, is like a snake and he goes right up to the line without actually declaring his intentions or what he's actually saying is even more dangerous. And actually, I have less respect for him for it. It's really wild to say I have respect for Nick Fuentes, but I have respect that at least he's open about it. Tucker Carlson and Candace are playing off of each other by implying this nefarious Jewish power, decrying it, urging everyone to investigate it, and then never presenting any evidence. Of course, there isn't any evidence, but the question is, why are they allowed to be accepted within the conservative movement? I'm not saying they should be censored on YouTube or on X or anywhere else, but there is a major question as to why these people are empowered and seen as legitimate voices of conservatism. This is not a chance. Again, this is not an attempt to silence critics of Israel or of Jewish communities. You know who's going to be very critical of liberal Jewish communities? Jews, because there are so many people who understand the progressive threat, or the threat that progressive poses to both the Jewish community and America at large. Just talk to any right-wing Israeli about what they think about leftist ideas infiltrating Israel or otherwise. So the concept that there's no conversation about it is just not true. But for Tucker to broadcast it in such a way, and for Candace Owens to broadcast in such a way, is particularly dangerous. And it's disturbing that they still have recognition and pull within the conservative movement. It's hard to refute a lot of what they're saying because there's no evidence even presented. They just go up to the line in legalese and get away with it. And the challenge for commentators and conservatives is, for how long are they going to be able to get away with it? The more that Tucker and Candace spew this garbage from the stage of Turning Point USA and other stages, the worse it will get. Again, if they actually were open with what they're implying and open with what they actually believe, we'd be having a very different discussion, because you could address it on the terms and dispute or refute what's going on, or perhaps even come to some mutual understanding. But when they go out and deliberately speak in extremely vague fashion and simply imply what they mean, it's a very different ballgame, and it's much more dangerous. So I hope that people in the conservative movement have the courage to start speaking up and stopping this insanity. And I would say this about any other group if they were being attacked in this way. And some of Tucker's supporters, they send messages and they say, "Oh, well, you're Jewish, so of course you're going to say this." I have no idea what that means. You're basically saying because someone is of a faith-based community or believes in Jewish tradition, that therefore they're disqualified from accurately calling out someone who's clearly antagonizing the Jewish community with falsehoods. If someone's more well-versed in the ins and outs of the community, perhaps they could actually speak to it. But this is the kind of nefarious game that Tucker and Candace are playing. And I hope, as we enter a new Jewish year, that people can rise up peacefully and make sure that this kind of stuff is stopped, because it's particularly dangerous. It erodes the unity in the conservative movement, and it actually distorts what President Trump himself wants. President Trump himself has stood up against Iran, has seen the threat of Iran for a decade, has made standing up to Iran a core part of his policy. And you have people like Tucker Carlson working very hard to erode all these things. So